The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has called the Russian President Vladimir Putin's response to the American proposed ceasefire just not good enough. Now, Keir Starmer was in fact addressing the media after hosting a virtual summit of about 26 nations to discuss support for Ukraine.
The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said he's willing to put British troops in Ukraine as peacekeepers after any deal.
Now, asserting what he called the coalition of willing is growing, Keir Starmer has urged Vladimir Putin to prove that he's serious about peace and to sign up to the Ukrainian ceasefire proposal.
It's unacceptable. British troops will be direct target for our missiles. You will get coffins in return.
I want you to imagine for a moment that you're Keir Starmer. You've been Prime Minister for just 7 months. You want to appear strong on the world stage. So you make comments about potentially deploying British troops near Ukraine. And within hours, Russian officials are threatening to target those troops with missiles on live television. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. It happened just days ago, creating the most dangerous standoff between Russia and Britain in decades. The diplomatic fallout has been swift and severe, with allies distancing themselves from Starmer's position and Ukrainian officials openly questioning his leadership. Let's break down exactly what went wrong and what limited options remain. So what exactly did Starmer say to provoke such a fierce Russian reaction? It turns out the Prime Minister crossed a dangerous line that's been silently respected by British leaders for decades, until now. Starmer made the unprecedented suggestion of potentially deploying British troops as peacekeepers in Ukraine, a dramatic shift from the UK's previous approach to the conflict. This wasn't just a minor diplomatic misstep. It represented a fundamental break from the cautious policies of his predecessors, who had managed to support Ukraine robustly without triggering direct confrontation with Russia. The contrast with previous administrations couldn't be more stark. Boris Johnson, the first Western leader to address Ukraine's parliament after the invasion, and Rishi Sunak both understood the delicate balance required when dealing with a nuclear power. They maintained strong support for Ukraine without crossing Moscow's clearly established red lines regarding direct NATO involvement. Starmer, in his eagerness to project strength, blundered directly into territory that seasoned diplomats know to avoid. The Russian response was immediate and chilling. Ivan Popov, appearing on Russian state television, didn't resort to the usual propaganda bluster. Instead, he delivered a matter-of-fact military assessment. British troops in Ukraine would become direct targets for our missiles. Security experts were particularly alarmed by the calculated coldness of the threat.
Sooner or later, Putin will have to come to the table. So this is the moment. Let the guns fall silent. Let the barbaric attacks on Ukraine once and for all stop, and agree to a ceasefire now.
In case a ceasefire is agreed or not agreed upon,
President Zelensky has shown once again, and beyond any doubt, that Ukraine is the party of peace. Volodymyr has committed to a 30-day unconditional ceasefire.
the British Prime Minister has further urged the world leaders to keep up the pressure on Russia.
And of course, we have some problems with economy, but you can do nothing with that. And we will fix it. You know that Russian people...
This wasn't performative saber-rattling, but a genuine military warning delivered with disturbing calm. What makes this incident particularly concerning is how it fits into a pattern of Starmer's inexperience on the world stage. His attempt to project strength has paradoxically weakened Britain's position through poorly calibrated rhetoric. The calculated nature of Russia's response suggests they view the Prime Minister as an amateur diplomat who can be easily provoked into dangerous territory. The reaction wasn't just about Starmer's words.
Russia.
So far as the UK is concerned, I've been very clear over a long period.
Is Donald Trump considered by you a friend of Russia?
Hopefully nothing will happen with that. I've asked them not to let anything happen, and I hope that nothing happens. But I feel that Russia is going to make a deal with us, I hope. We've spoken with President Putin. We've spoken with a lot of people.
Mr. Starmer Mr. Macron threatening to my country by new.
It was about crossing a long-established boundary that even the most hawkish previous UK leaders carefully respected. By openly discussing troop deployments in Ukraine, Starmer ventured into territory that Russia has consistently identified as grounds for direct military response. This wasn't merely strong support for Ukraine, it was rhetoric that directly challenged Russia's stated military doctrine. The consequences of Starmer's diplomatic blunder have reached far beyond angering Moscow. In a stunning twist that few anticipated, Ukraine itself has openly signaled its frustration with Britain's new leadership. Former Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba didn't mince words about the deteriorating relationship, pointing to a startling reality. His only unpleasant conversation with British officials occurred under Starmer's government, specifically regarding the delivery of Storm Shadow missiles and permissions for their use against certain targets. This revelation is particularly damning when contrasted with Kuleba's assessment that Boris Johnson set the threshold high for UK-Ukraine relations. The shift is unmistakable. Under Conservative leadership, Britain positioned itself as Ukraine's foremost European ally. Now, Ukrainian officials privately express that Starmer appears content to simply follow the Americans, rather than maintain the independent leadership role Britain had carved out for itself on the world stage.
Is that President Zelensky, who's with us this morning, has shown once again that Ukraine is the party of peace because he has agreed to and committed to a 30-day unconditional ceasefire.
Our teams worked very well at the meeting in Saudi Arabia, and we are in contact with the American side. We, Ukrainians, are very constructive, and it is important to push Russia to be constructive to end all these Russian manipulations that can only prolong the war.
On Saturday, the Russian Defense Ministry claimed that its troops had shot down about 126 Ukrainian drones overnight. On the other hand, Ukraine's Air Force said that Russia launched about 178 drones over the country, of which they had shot down about 130 drones, while 38 more were lost en route to their targets.
Nothing symbolizes this retreat from leadership more clearly than Starmer's failure to visit Ukraine since taking office in July. Both Johnson and Sunak made the journey to Kyiv shortly after their appointments, understanding that physical presence carries diplomatic weight that words alone cannot. Starmer's absence speaks volumes to Ukrainian officials, who interpret it as hesitation and lack of commitment at a time when unwavering support is desperately needed. As Britain's influence wanes, other European powers are already moving to fill the vacuum. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has begun calling for Europe to show decisive leadership in response to the escalating tensions, pointedly making no mention of Britain in her statements. This diplomatic sidelining represents a remarkable reversal for a country that, just months ago, was considered Ukraine's champion in Europe. The timing of Russia's threat against Britain couldn't have been worse for Ukraine. It coincided precisely with President Zelensky facing humiliation in Washington at the hands of President Trump, creating a perfect storm where Kyiv suddenly found itself seemingly abandoned by its strongest supporters. Moscow's calculated response reveals how they view Starmer, not as a formidable adversary, but as an inexperienced politician struggling to navigate international waters. The diplomatic fallout has left Britain increasingly isolated. Traditional allies have carefully distanced themselves from Starmer's aggressive rhetoric, unwilling to be drawn into his diplomatic misstep. Far from projecting strength, Starmer's provocative stance has been perceived as weakness by both Russia and Britain's allies alike, creating a perception that he lacks the diplomatic finesse required for dealing with nuclear powers. We've now arrived at the most troubling aspect of this unfolding crisis. Nuclear experts are sounding alarm bells about the genuine risk of escalation if this diplomatic standoff continues its dangerous trajectory. What began as political posturing has morphed into something far more sinister, a scenario where miscalculation could have catastrophic consequences. Starmer finds himself trapped in a diplomatic corner of his own making. His options have dwindled to two equally unappealing choices: retreat and be labeled weak and indecisive, or press forward and risk turning rhetorical threats into military reality. This is the perilous nature of performative tough talk on the international stage. Words that seemed politically expedient domestically have triggered real-world nuclear threats abroad. The ultimate question facing Britain isn't about a momentary embarrassment on Russian television. It's whether Starmer possesses the diplomatic skill to navigate away from this precipice without sacrificing Britain's standing or security. With Ukraine's future hanging in the balance and Russia's nuclear messaging growing increasingly explicit, the stakes couldn't be higher. This isn't political theater anymore. It's a dangerous game where rhetoric could all too easily become reality.